What happens when a millionaire tests his fiancée's love by pretending to lose everything? Will she stay or will she walk away? Secrets, lies, and a heart-wrenching decision put their love to the ultimate test. Can trust be rebuilt after betrayal, or is it too late? Watch now to find out if love can survive the final test. Where do you stand in a relationship when everything falls apart? David Simmons stood in front of the full-length mirror, staring at his reflection. His eyes were tired, and his jaw clenched with uncertainty. The luxury of his high-rise apartment, the wealth at his disposal, and the power he held in the corporate world felt hollow now. His reflection looked back at him, but he didn't recognize the man he had become. Sophia, his wife, was everything he had ever wanted in a partner. She was intelligent, kind, and, at least in his mind, far more than he deserved. Yet despite all the love and success they shared, David couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that Sophia's affection was tied to his wealth. Was she really in love with him, or was it the lifestyle he provided? The thought lingered, unresolved, for too long. He had to know. For once he needed the truth. Did she love him for who he was, or just for the life he gave her? With a sigh, David reached for the letter in his hand. The decision was made. There was no turning back. He had to test her. A part of him hated the idea, but another part of him was desperate for the reassurance that their love was real and not a product of his success. He crumpled the letter in his fist before letting it fall into the trash. It was no longer necessary. The plan was set. A week from now, he would disappear. He would cut all ties to his wealth, live as an ordinary man, and watch to see how long it would take before Sophia began to question him, before she realized that without the money, there was no lavish lifestyle to lean on, and then he would know. David's phone buzzed, breaking him from his thoughts. He glanced down at the screen, seeing Sophia's name. His heart skipped a beat. He had promised her they'd meet for dinner tonight, but the idea of seeing her now felt like a betrayal. He had already begun the first steps of his plan, but her love and trust had no place in this cruel test. Taking a deep breath, David typed a quick response. "Can't make it tonight. Work's been crazy. Sorry." He hit send before he could second-guess himself. He stared at the screen, the weight of the lie sinking in. Sophia deserved more than this. But the fear, the gut-wrenching, soul-crushing fear of being loved for the wrong reasons, kept him moving forward. He had to see if her love was real, if she could still love him when the money was gone, when the luxuries that defined their life were stripped away. David wasn't sure when he became so obsessed with proving something that didn't need proving. Maybe it had started when he saw his ex, Cassandra, with someone else, someone who didn't have a fraction of David's wealth. She had left him years ago, and he never fully understood why. Was it the money? Was it him? Now, every time he looked at Sophia, he wondered if he was just another placeholder until someone better came along. His phone buzzed again, and this time, he didn't need to look to know it was her. He felt a pang of guilt, one that he couldn't shake off. "David, are you okay? You've been distant lately. I know we're both busy, but it's not like you to cancel plans. We haven't spent time together in days." Her message echoed in his mind, pulling at his heartstrings. He had built this life, this perfect, shining life, and now he was throwing it away. For a test, for a lie. But the doubt was too loud. It drowned out every voice of reason. He glanced back at his reflection, wondering if he would even recognize himself after this. Would he become a stranger? Would he see the man he used to be, or was he just a shadow of his former self? David took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. There was no turning back now. He had already planned his exit. He had already chosen his path. He would pretend to be someone else. For a month, he would become someone Sophia had never seen, someone ordinary, someone without the trappings of wealth, someone he wasn't sure even existed anymore. And he would watch. He would watch as everything he had built crumbled. But would she stay? Would she love him? David stood there for a long time, staring at his reflection, wrestling with the choices he had made. Then finally, he reached for his phone once again. "I'm sorry. I've been thinking about us, and I just need some space. I'll be back in a few days, okay?" He pressed send. His heart raced, but he knew there was no going back. David's plan had begun. And as the silence filled the room, the weight of his decision settled over him. David's first morning in the small, rundown apartment was a jarring contrast to the polished glass and marble of his former home. He awoke to the muffled sounds of traffic outside, a far cry from the silence and luxury of his high-rise. The bed was small, the sheets thin, and the air felt colder than it ever had in his grand penthouse. For the first time in years, he didn't wake up to a seamless routine of expensive coffee, perfectly pressed shirts, or the hum of assistants and advisors buzzing around him. Instead, he had a dirty coffee mug that he washed out in the kitchen sink, a generic shirt he bought off the clearance rack, and a job he never thought he'd have again, serving drinks at a local cafe. His hands shook slightly as he made the coffee. It wasn't from nerves, not yet. It was the sudden realization of how far he had fallen, how quickly his life had changed. But there was no turning back now. Sophia had no idea. She believed the story he'd given her, that he was working through some difficult personal matters and needed time away. He had told her nothing of the financial upheaval he was truly going through. The truth was that David was living a lie, and the lie was slowly consuming him. At the cafe, the clinking of cups and the low murmur of customers felt like a strange soundtrack to his new life. His boss, a middle-aged man named Greg, kept an eye on him, occasionally throwing a nod or a gruff, "Good work." David was still getting used to the pace, the small talk, the complete lack of importance. He wasn't a millionaire here. He was just another guy behind the counter, blending in with the others, trying to make enough tips to scrape by. The regulars came and went. The barista, a woman named Lisa, was friendly enough but completely unaware of who David really was. She assumed he was another man down on his luck, someone who didn't mind a simple job for a while. David never corrected her. Each morning as he made coffee, he would think about Sophia. He imagined her waking up in their luxurious bedroom, stretching beneath the soft, expensive sheets, the sunlight streaming in from the large windows. He wondered if she ever thought about him, wondered if she was starting to miss the life they had, or if she was beginning to see that maybe without the wealth, he was just a stranger. Later that evening, David's phone buzzed. He saw Sophia's name flash on the screen, and for a moment his heart stopped. He couldn't bring himself to answer. It was easier this way, distant, silent. He couldn't face her yet, not while pretending, not when he was becoming someone he wasn't sure he recognized anymore. After a few moments, he composed himself and sent a message. "I'm sorry, Soph. I just need some space to figure things out. I'll be okay." He hit send before he could back out. The message felt cold, but it was the truth, wasn't it? He was trying to figure things out, just not in the way she imagined. The following days blurred together. David's routine became monotonous. Wake up, work, go home, sleep, wake up again. There was no excitement, no rush of meetings or conferences. There were no stock market reports or calls from investors asking for his expertise. There was nothing but the hum of the coffee shop and the feeling that he was losing his grip on the world he once ruled. The loneliness crept in slowly. At first it was subtle, just a passing thought here and there. He would look around the shop and wonder if anyone knew who he was. Then it became a constant whisper, a nagging reminder that he had given up everything. His identity, his power, his wealth. He had traded it all for this. And the hardest part? The hardest part was knowing that he had done this all to test Sophia's love. It wasn't long before Sophia started sending more messages, each one filled with concern, each one more desperate. "How are you doing, David? I miss you. Please talk to me. Why won't you return my calls? What's going on?" David read each message with a heavy heart. He wanted to tell her the truth, to stop the charade, but the fear, the same fear that had started this whole mess, kept him from reaching out. What if she didn't understand? What if she hated him for doing this? But the more he ignored her, the more the guilt weighed on him. He had pushed her away, isolated her, all in the name of finding out if she truly loved him. He poured himself a drink, sitting on the small couch in his apartment. His mind was racing. The loneliness he felt was suffocating, and yet he couldn't bring himself to end it. How could he? What if she didn't love him anymore? What if, without his wealth, he was nothing to her? By the time the week ended, David had made up his mind. He couldn't keep doing this. He couldn't live in this twisted version of reality. It was draining him. It was breaking him. He finally responded to one of Sophia's messages. "I need to talk. I'm coming over." He didn't know what he expected. Maybe a tearful reunion. Maybe an angry confrontation. But whatever it was, it had to happen. As he pressed send, David felt a strange mix of relief and dread. He was finally going to face the truth. No more pretending. No more lies. But when he looked at his phone one last time before leaving, his stomach churned. Sophia had already replied, though the message was simple. "I miss you too. Come home." David sat in the small apartment, his phone buzzing once more. It was another message from Sophia. Her messages had become more frequent, each one carrying a subtle shift from concern to frustration. "Why are you shutting me out, David? I don't understand what's happening. We were fine. What happened to us?" Each message felt like a slap to his face. He had put up walls, brick by brick, and now the weight of his own construction was suffocating him. He had always been in control of his world, the business world, the high-stakes decisions, the power to manipulate situations. But now, in the silence of this tiny apartment, all of that seemed meaningless. Sophia's voice echoed in his mind, soft but insistent. "Do you love me, or do you just love the life I give you?" David's fingers hovered over the screen, his heart pounding. He wanted to explain, wanted to tell her the truth, but how could he? How could he admit that he had deliberately put their love to the test, that he had sacrificed their peace for a warped sense of validation? He dropped the phone onto the coffee table, unable to answer. The guilt was consuming him. Every time he thought about reaching out, the fear of losing her pushed him further into his shell. What if she left him? What if the truth was too much to bear? The days stretched on, each one blending into the next. David worked at the cafe, spending his shifts in a haze of motions, barely interacting with anyone other than the occasional customer. He watched life pass by through a window that had once been his metaphorical boundary, his protection against the world outside. Now the same world felt impossibly distant. Sophia, on the other hand, seemed to grow more distant with each passing day. She didn't speak to him as much when they did text. Her messages were shorter, more formal. Her concern was still there, but there was a coldness creeping in. She had started to ask him more pointed questions, trying to get to the bottom of what was happening. David felt it, the widening gap between them. It was not just physical, as he lived in this small apartment while she stayed in their comfortable home, but emotional too. The warmth in her texts was fading, replaced by a growing suspicion. He couldn't blame her for it. He was the one who had pulled away, and now he was reaping what he had sown. One evening after a long shift, David walked home with a heavy heart. The small streets were empty, the silence around him a stark reminder of how alone he felt. As he reached the door to his apartment, he checked his phone, a message from Sophia. "Can we talk? I don't understand anymore." David felt a lump in his throat. He had promised himself that he would come clean, that he would face the truth. But every time he saw her name, his mind froze. How could he face her after everything he had done? How could he tell her that the love she had so freely given him was being tested in the most cruel and selfish way? He opened the door to his apartment and stepped inside. The room felt even smaller than it had the night before, as if the walls were closing in on him. He sat down on the couch and stared at the phone. The message was still there, blinking at him like a beacon of his own failure. Sophia's frustration had reached its peak. The silence from David was deafening. She had tried everything, calling, texting, even sending little reminders of the life they once had. But all of it was met with coldness. David was a shadow of the man she had married, and it hurt more than she cared to admit. She couldn't help but feel betrayed. How had they gone from talking about their future to this emptiness? Was it really just about the money? Was that all she had been to him? The doubts began to gnaw at her. Could she ever trust him again? Could they go back to what they had before? Or was this the beginning of the end? She needed answers, but David wasn't offering any. She stared at her phone, the decision weighing heavily on her. Maybe, just maybe, it was time for her to take control of this situation. The next day, David was sitting at the cafe stirring a cup of coffee absently. The hours felt like they dragged on, each one blending into the next. As much as he tried to focus on his tasks, his mind kept drifting back to Sophia. He hadn't heard from her in hours, and that only made him more anxious. He had to talk to her. But what would he say? How could he justify the cruelty of his actions? He reached for his phone again. Another message from Sophia. His stomach churned. I need to know the truth, David. This silence, it's killing me. Please tell me what's going on. David's breath caught in his throat. He read the message again, his mind racing. This was it. The moment he had been avoiding. The moment of reckoning. Sophia was reaching out, asking for the truth. But could he give it to her? Could he confess the lie that had already begun to destroy them? He had to act. His fingers hovered over the screen, typing and deleting, typing and deleting. Finally, he settled on the words. I'm sorry, I've been hiding the truth from you. I didn't mean to hurt you. But I've been testing our love. And now I see how wrong I was. He hesitated before hitting send, the weight of the admission almost too much to bear. Would she understand? Would she leave him? He couldn't bear the thought. He hit send. The phone buzzed with a new message from Sophia. I don't know if I can believe you anymore. David's heart sank. The distance had only grown, and now he was facing the consequences of his own selfish actions. This was what he had feared all along. The loss of her trust. The realization that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't enough for her after all. The gap between them had widened beyond repair, and David wasn't sure how to bridge it. David sat at the worn-out kitchen table in his small apartment, staring at the pile of bills in front of him. Each one was a reminder of the life he had abandoned. The weight of his decision, of pretending to be someone he wasn't, was beginning to feel unbearable. His bank account was rapidly dwindling, and the small amount he made working at the cafe didn't even come close to covering the basics. The apartment felt colder today, and the silence hung heavy in the air. He could hear the sound of his own breathing, steady but slow, as if the whole world was closing in on him. He ran his fingers through his hair, fighting back the wave of panic that was threatening to engulf him. How had it come to this? How had his plan gone so wrong? Sophia had no idea. She had no idea that he was sinking deeper into financial ruin every day, that the world he had built around them was collapsing beneath his feet. The wealthy, successful man she knew was disappearing, and in his place was someone he hardly recognized, someone who couldn't provide for her, couldn't even provide for himself. Sophia, on the other hand, was in the midst of her own struggle. She had started working overtime at her job, taking on extra shifts at the school. The cutbacks had left her with little choice. If she didn't pick up the slack, they wouldn't be able to make ends meet. Every day she left the house earlier and came home later. The weight of the additional work, paired with her growing frustration with David's continued silence, was starting to wear her down. She hadn't seen him in days, hadn't heard from him except for the occasional curt text message. He had become a shadow in her life, and it was eating away at her. One morning, as David made his way to the cafe, the thought of seeing Sophia again sent a knot of anxiety into his stomach. He had been avoiding her, but every day it became harder to do so. He missed her more than he cared to admit, but there was a guilt inside him, a crippling guilt that prevented him from reaching out. What could he say to her? What could he say after everything he had put her through? The silence between them had stretched into a chasm, and he didn't know how to cross it. The bell above the cafe door rang as David walked in. He moved quickly behind the counter, trying to lose himself in the routine of grinding coffee beans, steaming milk, and pouring lattes. It was the one place where he didn't have to think about the mess he had created. But even here, the weight of his decisions lingered. The day dragged on, customers coming and going, each one oblivious to the storm David was weathering. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Sophia. He hesitated, then pulled it out, his heart skipping a beat as he saw the message. David, we need to talk. I can't keep doing this. I feel like I'm carrying everything on my own. His stomach dropped. He could feel her pain through those few words. She was frustrated, confused, and he had done nothing to help. David stared at the message for a long moment. What could he say? The truth seemed too complicated, too painful. He could already feel her anger, her disappointment, and it shattered him. Back at the apartment, the phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't from Sophia. It was a notification from his bank. His account balance had dropped below a threshold, another alert for an overdraft fee. David sank into the couch, staring blankly at the wall. His mind raced, but he couldn't make sense of it all. He had built an empire, a legacy, and now he was living paycheck to paycheck, barely able to cover rent, let alone his mounting debts. He picked up his phone again, the screen flashing back to Sophia's message. He opened it, took a deep breath, and began typing. "I'm sorry, Soph. I'm so sorry for everything. I know I've failed you." The words felt hollow. They didn't feel like enough. What he had done to her, to their relationship, couldn't be undone with a simple apology, but it was all he had. He hit send. The message lingered on the screen for a moment, then disappeared into the void. Sophia stood in the kitchen, staring at her phone. The message from David had arrived, but it felt empty. He was sorry, yes. But how could he be sorry when he had done nothing to fix what was broken? Her exhaustion was visible, physically and emotionally. The long hours, the endless work, the constant worry about David. It was wearing her down. She loved him, but she couldn't keep carrying the weight of their relationship on her own. She had always believed in them, in their love. But now she wasn't sure. The distance between them had become too great, the cracks in their foundation too deep. She didn't know if she could keep going like this. The phone buzzed again, a call from David. Sophia stared at the screen for a moment, her finger hovering over the answer button. She wanted to pick up. She wanted to hear his voice, to have him explain everything, to make things right. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. With a sigh, she let the phone ring out. She didn't have the energy to fight anymore, to plead with him, to understand what he was doing to them. Maybe he didn't love her the way she loved him. Maybe that was the truth. David sat back on the couch, the silence surrounding him suffocating. The phone call had gone unanswered, and the weight of his actions pressed down on him harder than ever. He had put her through this. He had tested her love in the worst way possible. And now, he didn't know if there was anything left to save. David's heart raced as he stood in the doorway of their apartment, staring at the living room where Sophia was sitting. The space felt smaller than it ever had, the walls seemingly closing in around him. He had been avoiding this moment for days, unable to face the truth he had created. Sophia was looking at him, her expression a mixture of frustration, hurt, and something else, something deeper that he couldn't quite name. She had always been the one who understood him, who saw through the walls he put up. But now the walls were too high, too thick, and he couldn't even begin to understand what was happening between them. "Soph." His voice was shaky, the words feeling unnatural. He hadn't been able to find the right ones in days. "Don't Soph me, David," she snapped, her voice tight with emotion. "I've been patient. I've tried to understand, but you've shut me out for weeks. I don't even know who you are anymore." David winced, the words cutting deeper than he expected. I didn't mean to hurt you." "No," she interrupted sharply. "You didn't mean to hurt me, but you did. You've been pushing me away, and I don't know why. I can't keep doing this." David's breath caught in his throat. Her words hit him like a wave, knocking the wind out of him. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The weight of everything, the lies, the guilt, the fear, crashed over him. Sophia stood up, her hands clenched at her sides. "I've been carrying everything on my own, working extra hours, trying to keep this relationship together when you've been pulling away. You're not even trying anymore, David. I can't keep fighting for something that isn't there." David's heart sank. He hadn't realized how much she had been carrying, how much pain she was hiding behind her kindness and patience. The guilt gnawed at him, eating away at his resolve. "I don't know what you want me to say," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to be honest with me," she said, stepping closer to him. "Why are you doing this? Why are you shutting me out? What happened to us?" Her voice broke on the last word, and David saw the tears threatening to spill from her eyes. The sight of her pain hit him harder than anything he had ever felt before. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about wealth or success. This was about love and how, in his desperate need for assurance, he had torn apart the very thing he wanted most. David swallowed hard. His chest tightened as he realized that the time for lies was over. He had to tell her. He had to admit everything, no matter how much it hurt. I've been testing you, he finally confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush. Testing our love. Sophia froze. Testing? What the hell do you mean testing? I thought... He stopped, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. I thought you might only love me for my money, for the life I gave you. So I pretended to lose everything. I wanted to see if you'd still be here, if you'd still love me without the wealth, without the things that came with it. Sophia stepped back as though he had struck her. You've been testing me? For how long? Her voice shook with disbelief, her hands trembling. For how long, David? David looked away, unable to meet her gaze. A few weeks, he admitted, his voice thick with guilt. I thought I could prove it. Prove that you loved me for who I am. But I see now. I've ruined everything. Sophia's face was pale, her eyes wide with shock. You think I'd leave you because of money? She whispered, her voice barely audible. David nodded, a lump forming in his throat. He had been so consumed by his fears that he had lost sight of what mattered. I didn't know how to trust you anymore. I didn't know how to trust myself, he said, his voice cracking. Sophia was silent for a moment, her hands at her sides. The tension in the room was unbearable. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been trying to hold this relationship together, David. I've been working so hard, but you pushed me away. You shut me out without even giving me a chance to fight for us. And now you want me to believe that it was all because of some test? David's heart broke as he saw the raw pain in her eyes. He wanted to reach for her, to apologize, to tell her that he was sorry, that he had made a terrible mistake. But he didn't know if words would be enough anymore. I was scared, he said, his voice small, almost ashamed. I was scared that without the money, you wouldn't love me anymore, that I was just a trophy to you, that the person I was, the real me, wasn't enough. Sophia took a deep breath, her eyes filling with tears. David, she said quietly, I don't need your money. I don't need all this material stuff. I need you. I need your love. But right now, I don't know if I can trust you anymore. David's heart sank. He had tested her love, and now it was his own that was being tested. How could he have been so foolish? I'm sorry, he said again, the words feeling hollow. I never should have done this. I never should have put you through this pain. Sophia shook her head, wiping away a tear. It's not just about the pain, David. It's about the trust we've lost. You betrayed me. You betrayed us. David felt the weight of her words settle into him like a stone. He had destroyed something beautiful, something that he didn't think he could live without. I don't know if we can fix this, Sophia said softly, looking away. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Not after this. David reached out, but she pulled away. The distance between them had never felt so wide. I understand, he whispered. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'll do anything to fix this. Anything. Sophia didn't answer. She just turned and walked toward the door. David stood frozen in place, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. He had no idea what came next, but one thing was certain. His life, his love, had been shattered, and now he had to find a way to rebuild it. David sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. The weight of the last few days had crushed him completely. He had thought that confronting Sophia with the truth would set him free, but instead, it had only deepened the rift between them. She hadn't said a word since their argument, and every time he tried to reach out, she pulled away further. The silence between them was unbearable. His phone buzzed suddenly, breaking the heavy stillness. He looked at the screen, half expecting another terse message from Sophia. But it wasn't her. It was a text from Ben, his old friend, the one who had known about his plan all along. Ben had always been the voice of reason, or at least David had used to think so. Now he wasn't so sure. David, we need to talk. I think you've made a huge mistake. Call me. David stared at the message, his stomach churning. He knew what Ben was going to say. He had warned him, even tried to talk him out of the whole idea. But David had been so consumed by his own insecurities that he hadn't listened. He glanced at the phone again, then sighed. What did he have left to lose? He tapped the screen and dialed Ben's number. Ben's voice crackled through the speaker when he answered. David, this was a terrible idea. You've destroyed everything. David didn't have the energy to argue. I know, Ben. I know. But I didn't know what else to do. Ben was silent for a moment before speaking again, his tone softer. You don't test people you love, man. You don't put them through something like this. You've hurt Sophia, and now she's probably questioning everything. How could you think that wasn't going to happen? David squeezed his eyes shut. I don't know, I couldn't trust that she loved me for me, not for the life I gave her. You should have trusted her, Ben said firmly. You've always been so afraid of losing control, of losing everything you built, but you lost her in the process, and now you're left with nothing but regret. David's heart sank as he listened to Ben's words. They hit him harder than he expected. Ben wasn't wrong. He had always been afraid of losing everything, afraid of being left behind. But now he was losing something far more important, Sophia, and it was his own fault. I don't know what to do anymore, David admitted, his voice hollow. Ben sighed, exasperated. You have to be honest with her, David. No more games, no more lies. You have to show her that you're willing to do whatever it takes to fix this. David nodded, even though Ben couldn't see him. I will. I don't know if she'll ever forgive me. You won't know unless you try, Ben replied. But you've got to start by telling her everything, not just the surface level stuff, all of it. The fear, the insecurities, the reason why you've been acting the way you have. She deserves the truth. David's hands trembled as he ended the call. The words Ben had spoken lingered in his mind like a constant hum, but they also left him with a new sense of clarity. Sophia deserved the truth, even if it shattered him in the process. He had hurt her, and now it was up to him to try to make it right. Later that night, after another long, quiet day at the cafe, David stood in the middle of his apartment, staring at the door. He could hear Sophia moving around inside, but there was an impenetrable distance between them. She hadn't said much all day, and it was clear that the conversation they needed to have was long overdue. He exhaled, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He walked toward the living room where Sophia was sitting on the couch, her gaze fixed on the floor. She looked tired, more exhausted than he had ever seen her, and it broke his heart to see her like this. Sophia, he said quietly, his voice cracking. She didn't respond, but he could feel her attention shifting. We need to talk. Her eyes met his, and for a moment they just stood there, the silence stretching out between them. Finally, Sophia spoke, her voice a mix of frustration and sadness. What is there left to say, David? She asked. You've lied to me. You've lied to both of us. David's chest tightened. He could see the hurt in her eyes, feel it in the air between them. I know, I'm sorry, he whispered. But you deserve the truth, all of it. Sophia's expression softened slightly, but there was still a hard edge to it. Then tell me everything. David took a deep breath, his hands shaking as he sat down beside her. I've been testing you, Soph. I've been testing our love. I thought I could prove that you loved me for who I am, not just for the money, the life I've given you. And I was wrong. I was so wrong. Sophia didn't say anything. She just watched him, waiting for more, her gaze unwavering. I've been so afraid, David continued, his voice thick with emotion. Afraid that without the money, without the things I've built, you wouldn't love me. I've always been afraid of losing everything, my success, my control, my worth. And in trying to hold on to all of that, I pushed you away. I made you feel like you weren't enough. Tears welled in David's eyes as he spoke. But I see now that I've been a fool. I've hurt you more than I could have ever imagined. And I can't take that back. All I can do is ask for your forgiveness. Sophia's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she listened to him. She looked at him for a long moment as though weighing his words before she spoke softly. I don't know if I can forgive you, David, she said, her voice breaking. You've hurt me so deeply, and I don't know if we can ever go back to the way we were. David felt a sharp pang in his chest. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, he whispered. "But I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. To prove to you that I'm not just the man I've been pretending to be. I want to be the man you deserve." Sophia looked at him, her face a mixture of pain and uncertainty. "I don't know if that's enough, David. I really don't." David sat silently, the weight of his own mistakes crushing him. He had no answers, no promises. He only had the hope that somehow he could rebuild what he had broken. David sat at the small kitchen table, his hands gripping the coffee cup in front of him, but his mind was far away. The silence in the apartment was suffocating, and he couldn't escape the constant gnawing guilt that had taken root deep inside him. The confrontation with Sophia had shaken him to his core, but the emptiness in the pit of his stomach told him that nothing had been resolved. Not yet. His phone buzzed on the table, interrupting his thoughts. David glanced down at the screen. It was a message from Ben. "David, we need to talk. I think you've made a huge mistake. Call me." David's stomach twisted. He had expected this call, this confrontation. Ben had known about his plan from the start. He had been the one to advise against it, to warn David that it would only lead to pain. But David had been too blinded by his fear and doubt to listen. He picked up the phone and dialed Ben's number, waiting for the familiar ring on the other end. The line clicked, and then Ben's voice filled the room. "David," Ben said, his tone tight, "I can't believe you went through with this. You've ruined everything." David felt the weight of Ben's words settle on him, heavy and unavoidable. He had ruined everything. He had sacrificed trust and love in an attempt to validate his own insecurities. "I know, Ben," David whispered, his voice thick with regret. "I didn't know what else to do. I thought if I tested her, I thought I could prove that she loved me for who I am, not just for my money." There was a pause on the other end. Then Ben spoke again, his voice laced with frustration. "That's the thing, David. You never trusted her. You never trusted her love or your own. And now look at the mess you've made. You've lost her trust, and maybe worse, you've lost yourself in the process." David sat back in his chair, his chest tightening. Ben's words felt like a punch to the gut. He knew it was true. He had built his life around wealth and status, but somewhere along the way, he had stopped believing in the simple, raw power of love. "I didn't think it would go this far," David said, the guilt seeping through his voice. "I thought if I tested her, I could be sure. But I didn't even give her a chance to prove herself. I just pushed her away. And now she doesn't even want to talk to me." Ben let out a long sigh. "David, you've always had a way of controlling everything in your life. And now look at what it's cost you. You've taken her love and turned it into some kind of experiment. You need to come clean to her, man. No more lies. No more running away." David ran a hand over his face, the weight of the truth bearing down on him. "I don't know if she'll ever forgive me," he admitted. "What if I've done too much damage?" Ben was silent for a moment, then he spoke again, his voice softer. "You won't know until you face it. You can't keep hiding from the truth, David, and neither can I. I'm part of this mess too." David furrowed his brow, confused. "What do you mean? You didn't do anything. I'm the one who messed everything up." Ben sighed again, a deep, tired sound. "I should have told you to stop. I should have stepped in. I knew what you were doing, but I didn't say anything. I went along with it, even though I knew it was wrong. I let you convince me that it was for the right reasons. And now I have to live with the fact that I was part of this. I knew the whole time, David. I knew you were testing her, and I didn't stop it." David's mind reeled. He had thought he was the only one involved in this twisted scheme. He had assumed that Ben was just the voice of reason, someone who had silently supported him. But now Ben was admitting that he had been complicit. It hit David harder than he expected. "Why didn't you tell me to stop?" David asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me how wrong this was?" "I should have," Ben said, his voice filled with regret. "I should have told you that love isn't something you test. It's something you give. And it's something you trust." David closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of Ben's words. "I've destroyed everything, haven't I?" he whispered. "I've lost Sophia, I've lost myself, and now I'm losing you too." "No," Ben replied firmly, "you haven't lost me. But you have to fix this. You have to be honest with her. If you want to save this, you have to be completely honest. No more secrets, no more lies. You've got to show her that you're willing to put in the work, that you're willing to trust her and trust yourself. David's breath hitched as he processed Ben's words. The truth was staring him in the face. He had spent so long running from it, so long hiding behind the false safety of control, that he had forgotten what it meant to be vulnerable, to let love in. "I'll do whatever it takes," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll tell her everything. I'll face the consequences. I just don't want to lose her, Ben." "You won't lose her if you're honest with her, but you have to be real. You've got to show her the real you, not the man you were pretending to be, the man you really are." David felt a spark of hope flicker in his chest. It wasn't too late. It couldn't be. He had to believe that. "Thanks, Ben," he said quietly, his voice full of gratitude. I needed to hear that." Ben sighed, a sound of relief. "Good luck, David. You've got this. But remember, no more lies." David ended the call, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. He couldn't change what had already happened, but he could change how it ended. He could choose to be honest with Sophia, to finally show her who he really was. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start rebuilding what he had broken. David sat on the edge of the small, worn-out couch in his apartment, his mind racing. The phone call with Ben still echoed in his ears, the words hitting him with the force of a freight train. "You never trusted her. You've lost her trust." The gravity of what he had done to Sophia, to their relationship, was sinking in. He had spent so much time running from his fears, pushing people away, trying to maintain control over everything, that he hadn't seen the destruction he was causing. It wasn't just about money, or even the test he had put her through. It was about something much deeper. The lies he told, the walls he built around himself, had created a chasm between them that now felt impossible to bridge. The silence in the apartment was suffocating, and David could feel the weight of his own thoughts pressing down on him. What had he become? A man so afraid of losing everything that he had sabotaged the very thing he valued most. He closed his eyes, trying to piece everything together. Sophia, his wife, the woman he loved, had given him everything. Her trust, her heart, her unwavering support. And what had he done? He had treated her love like it was a challenge to overcome, not a gift to cherish. The past few days had been a blur. The confrontation with Sophia, the painful words they exchanged, the regret that followed. He had thought that by testing her, he would prove to himself that her love was real. But all he had done was prove how little he understood about love itself. Sophia deserved better than this. She deserved someone who didn't question her loyalty at every turn, someone who trusted her, and David had failed her. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. His own insecurities, his need for control, had driven him to push Sophia away. The man he had become, obsessed with status and validation, was not the man she fell in love with. She had loved him before the money, before the success, and he had failed to see that. He had failed to trust that. David's thoughts shifted to the moments he had shared with Sophia before everything had gone wrong. The laughter, the quiet evenings spent together, the simple joy of their companionship. These were the things that mattered, not the wealth, not the business deals, not the extravagant lifestyle. Sophia had never needed any of that. He had fooled himself into thinking that love could be bought or tested, but love wasn't a transaction. It wasn't something you could measure with money or power. It was built on trust, respect, and vulnerability. And David had closed himself off from all of that. His chest tightened as the realization hit him like a wave. He had taken something pure and turned it into a game. He had put Sophia through a test she never asked for, and now he had no idea how to fix the damage he had caused. He could feel the weight of the truth now, settling into his bones. He had failed her in the worst possible way. David's hand reached for his phone, the urgency in his movements a reflection of how far he had fallen. He scrolled through his messages, seeing Sophia's name at the top. Her last message was still there, sitting in his inbox, unanswered. "David, I can't do this anymore. I need the truth. I need to know if you still love me." He stared at her words, feeling a lump rise in his throat. I need to know if you still love me." The thought of losing her, of knowing that his actions had pushed her to this point, was almost too much to bear. He couldn't leave things like this. He had to fix it, even if it meant facing the painful consequences of his choices. Taking a deep breath, he began typing. "Sophia, I love you. I love you more than anything. But I've been so lost in my own fears that I've hurt you, and I don't know if you can ever forgive me. I've made a mess of everything, and I'm so sorry. I need to be honest with you. I didn't trust you, and that's something I can never take back." He hesitated for a moment, looking at the message, wondering if it was enough, but he knew it wasn't. He had to tell her everything. He couldn't hide anymore. He couldn't protect himself from the truth any longer. With shaking hands, he added a final line. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I will do whatever it takes to prove that I am the man you deserve." David hit send, his heart pounding in his chest as he placed the phone down on the table. He couldn't undo the past, couldn't take back the hurt he had caused. But maybe, just maybe, he could start over. Maybe he could show Sophia that he was ready to be the man she had always believed in. David sat in silence, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. He couldn't stop thinking about what had led him here, what had caused him to doubt everything he had with Sophia. He had to learn to trust not just her, but himself as well. And it was only now, with everything on the line, that he finally understood what it meant to be vulnerable. The sound of his phone buzzing broke the silence. His heart skipped a beat as he reached for it. But when he saw the message from Sophia, he felt a wave of dread wash over him. "David, I don't know if I can forgive you, but I'll listen. We can talk, but it's going to take time. I need time." David exhaled, the relief mixed with a deep sadness. She hadn't forgiven him, not yet, but she hadn't given up on him either. There was hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make David believe that maybe, just maybe, he could fix this. David sat in his car outside their apartment, his hands clenched tightly on the steering wheel. The message from Sophia had been clear. "We need to talk." He had been waiting for this moment, dreading it, but it was finally here. The time for silence, for hiding, had ended. He had no more excuses. He had to face the consequences of what he had done. The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air, thick with the unspoken words that had built up between them. The lies, the silence, the doubt, everything had led to this confrontation. David didn't know what Sophia was thinking, but he knew what he felt. Fear, regret, a raw, almost unbearable ache in his chest. He glanced at the clock. It was almost time. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. But the truth was, nothing could prepare him for the storm he was about to face. Sophia stood at the door when David arrived. There was no warmth in her eyes, only a coldness that he had never seen before. The love he had once felt in her gaze was gone, replaced by a cautious, almost guarded expression. David's heart sank as he stepped inside. He wanted to apologize, to make everything right, but the words stuck in his throat. All he could do was stand there, waiting for her to speak. She didn't keep him waiting long. "You've got 5 minutes, David," she said, her voice flat. 5 minutes to tell me the truth. All of it." David's breath hitched. This was it, the moment he had been avoiding for so long. He had no choice but to speak now. He nodded, his throat dry. "I know I've hurt you, Sophia. I've been lying to you, and I don't even know why. I thought I could test our love. I was afraid. Afraid that without the money, without the life I've built, you wouldn't love me anymore. That you'd leave." Sophia's face softened, but only for a second. "So that's what this was, a test?" Her voice was a mixture of disbelief and hurt. "You put me through all this because you couldn't trust me?" David felt his chest tighten. "I didn't trust myself. I've been so caught up in this fear and this need to control everything that I didn't stop to think about what I was doing to you, to us." Sophia's eyes darkened, the hurt becoming anger. "You think I'm some kind of prize? Some game for you to win? I'm not some test, David. I'm a person you promised to love, and yet you didn't trust me. You thought I'd leave you just because you didn't have money anymore." David swallowed hard, the weight of her words crashing into him like a wave. "I never meant to hurt you. I thought if I tested you, If I pushed you to the edge, I could be sure that you love me for who I am, not for what I could give you." Sophia's laugh was bitter. "And what did you expect to happen? What, you wanted me to prove something to you? You've been pulling away from me for weeks. You've been shutting me out, refusing to talk, refusing to trust me. You've made me feel like I'm not enough, like I'm not worthy of your love unless I pass some ridiculous test." David's heart shattered as she spoke. Every word she said hit him like a punch, but it was the truth. He had made her feel less than worthy of his trust, less than worthy of his love. He had tested her like an experiment, and now there was nothing left but the aftermath. "I was wrong," David whispered, his voice barely audible. "I thought I was doing the right thing, but I wasn't. I ruined everything. I hurt you, and I don't know if I can ever make it right." Sophia's expression shifted again, this time to something even harder: indifference. "You want to make it right, David? You can't. Not just with words, not with apologies. You've broken my trust, and I don't know if it's something I can ever rebuild." David felt the sting of those words. He had always known that trust was fragile, but hearing it from Sophia, hearing her say it out loud, made him realize just how deep the damage went. He had betrayed her. He had betrayed the one person who had always been there for him. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said, his voice shaking, "but I'll do whatever it takes to prove that I can change, that I can be the man you deserve." Sophia shook her head. "You don't get it, David. You can't just fix this with some grand gesture. You've been hiding behind your wealth and your pride for so long that you don't even know who you are without it. You've hurt me, and you've hurt yourself in the process. I don't know if I can ever trust you again." The silence that followed was suffocating. David stood there, helpless, as Sophia's words cut through him like glass. He had made her feel like she wasn't enough. He had taken something beautiful and twisted it, turning it into a game, into a test. And now, all he could do was stand in the ruins of what was left. "I love you," he said, his voice breaking. "I love you more than anything, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I've done. I don't deserve you, but I can't let you go. Please don't walk away from me." Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "You hurt me, David, and I can't just forget that. I don't know what comes next. I don't know if we can fix this, but I need time. I need to think about everything you've said. I need to know if I can ever trust you again." David nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He had no right to ask for her forgiveness, but he knew that without her, he was nothing. As he turned to leave, he couldn't help but feel a small glimmer of hope. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe there was still a chance. But only time would tell if he could rebuild what he had broken. David walked through the door of his apartment. The silence that greeted him felt like a suffocating weight. He closed the door behind him gently, as if trying not to disturb the emptiness that now lingered in the place where once there had been life, warmth, and laughter. The conversation with Sophia still echoed in his mind, the pain of her words sharp and unforgiving. He had admitted everything. He had apologized, but he knew that words alone wouldn't fix the damage he had caused. The trust between them had been shattered, and now he had to face the consequences of his actions. He set down his keys on the counter, his movements slow and deliberate. He could hear the faint sound of traffic outside, the hum of the city. But inside the apartment, everything felt still. He didn't know what to do now. He didn't know how to fix this. Sophia hadn't given him a clear answer when he left. She had said she needed time, but time for what? To forgive him? To decide if she still wanted him in her life? David had no idea. All he could do was wait, a feeling of helplessness gnawing at him with every passing minute. He had always been someone who could control his surroundings. He had built his empire, forged relationships, and managed his wealth with precision. But now, in the aftermath of his choices, he felt powerless. He couldn't control Sophia's feelings. He couldn't control whether or not she would ever trust him again. The next few days passed in a blur. David threw himself into his work at the cafe, burying himself in the mundane tasks that, at least for a while, took his mind off the devastation he had caused. But no matter how hard he tried to distract himself, his mind always returned to Sophia. He thought about her constantly, how she looked when she cried, the way her voice had cracked when she told him she didn't know if she could forgive him. He had hurt her, and the worst part was, he had done it to himself too. He had spent so many years living a life of luxury, of control, of perfection, that he had forgotten what it meant to simply love and be loved. He had put so much stock in his success, in the things he could buy, that he had neglected the one thing that mattered most, his relationship with Sophia. Sophia didn't call. She didn't text. Days passed with no word from her, and David was left in the heavy silence. He kept telling himself that she needed time, that she needed space to process everything. But deep down, he feared that it was more than just time that she needed. What if she needed distance, not just time? What if this was the end of their relationship? The thought of losing her was unbearable. The thought of waking up every day without her by his side felt like a void he couldn't imagine filling. On the fourth day after their confrontation, David couldn't take it any longer. He had reached out a few times, left messages, but there was no reply. He needed to see her. He needed to look her in the eyes and make things right, even if he didn't know how. He drove to her apartment, his hands trembling on the steering wheel as he approached. The last time he had been here, things had felt different. There had been love in her eyes. Now he wasn't sure what to expect. He knew that he couldn't keep hiding, couldn't keep pretending that everything would be okay. As he parked outside, he sat for a moment, just staring at the building. His phone buzzed in his lap, and his heart skipped a beat as he grabbed it. It was a message from Sophia. "I'm at home. We need to talk." David's breath caught in his throat. This was it. He couldn't put it off any longer. He grabbed his keys, stepped out of the car, and walked toward the door. Each step felt heavy, like he was walking toward his own fate. He knocked, his knuckles tapping against the wood, the sound sharp in the quiet evening. The door opened slowly, and there she was. Sophia. She didn't smile, didn't say anything. She just looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness, frustration, and something else that David couldn't quite read. Without saying a word, she stepped aside, letting him into the apartment. They sat across from each other on the couch, the space between them feeling vast. David couldn't help but notice how distant she seemed, how much the walls between them had grown since the last time they had shared a quiet evening together. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He had no idea where to start, what to say that could even begin to make up for the mess he had created. Sophia spoke first, her voice soft but steady. "I've been thinking about everything you said, David, and I want you to know that I'm not angry at you anymore. But I can't just forget what happened." David's heart sank. "I don't expect you to. I don't expect anything from you. I need you to know that I'm sorry. And I'll do anything to prove that I can change. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to lose you." Sophia looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I don't know if I can trust you again, David. I don't know if I can ever be sure that you won't push me away again, that you won't turn everything into a test. But I do know this. I love you. I don't know where we go from here, but I need you to show me that you can be the person I thought you were." David's heart swelled at her words, a mix of relief and fear flooding his chest. He wasn't sure if he deserved her love, but hearing her say it gave him hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way back to each other. "I will," he said quietly, the words feeling both like a promise and a plea. "I'll show you that I can be that man. I can't change the past, but I'll do everything I can to make the future better." Sophia nodded slowly, her eyes softening just a little. "I hope you can, because I don't know how much more I can take." David reached across the space between them, his hand shaking as he took hers. "We'll figure it out, together." For the first time in days, David felt a small flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to believe that maybe the wreckage he had caused could be rebuilt. David sat across from Sophia at the small kitchen table, his hands resting nervously on the wood. The silence between them was thick, the kind that could either be comforting or suffocating. He had been waiting for this moment for days, ever since their conversation, when Sophia had given him the smallest sliver of hope. "We'll figure it out, together." Those words had been like a lifeline thrown into the stormy sea of his emotions. But now, as he watched her stir her coffee quietly, he wondered if those words were simply a kind gesture, or if they meant she was actually willing to give him a chance. He knew he didn't deserve it. He knew that rebuilding their trust wouldn't happen overnight. But he also knew that this was his one shot. He had to take it. Sophia finally looked up at him, her eyes tired but steady. "So what now?" Her voice was calm, almost too calm, like she was holding something back. David took a deep breath. "I don't have all the answers, Sophia. I don't know how we move forward from here, but I want to try. I want to show you that I can be the man you thought I was. Not the one who tests you, not the one who doubts you, the one who loves you." She didn't say anything for a moment, but he could see the flicker of emotion in her eyes. She was listening, weighing his words, trying to decide if she could believe him again. David's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing with the enormity of what he was asking. "I know I've broken your trust. I know I've hurt you in ways I can't undo. But I'm not asking for your forgiveness right now. I'm asking for a chance to prove that I can be someone worthy of your love." Sophia set her coffee cup down, her hands folding in front of her. "And what does that look like? You've said the right things before, David. But actions are what matter now. What are you going to do differently?" David nodded, relieved that she was finally engaging, that she wasn't shutting him out completely. "I've been living a lie for too long, trying to hold on to control. But I've learned that I don't have to control everything. I need to be open with you, to be vulnerable. I need to listen to you, not just talk at you. I need to show you that I can be honest even when it's hard." Sophia didn't look convinced. "And that's it? You think that's enough?" David could feel the weight of her skepticism, and he understood it. After everything, how could she believe him? How could she trust that he would change? "I don't expect it to be enough," he admitted, his voice soft. "But I'm willing to put in the work. I'll go to therapy. I'll learn how to communicate better. I'll prove that I can be a partner, not a test." Sophia sighed, rubbing her forehead. "David, I don't know. I don't know if I can just turn off what you've done to me. I don't know if I can forget how you made me feel like I was never enough, how you made me feel like I was constantly being measured." David's chest tightened, but he didn't look away. "I understand, and I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you to trust me again. And I know that's not something you can do easily, but I want to work for it, to show you that I'm worth that trust." There was a long pause before she spoke again. "I don't even know if I believe in us anymore. I've been holding on, trying to keep this relationship together, but now I wonder if I was just holding on to the idea of you, to the idea of what we were." David felt the sting of her words, but he didn't flinch. He couldn't afford to flinch. "If you don't believe in us, I get it. But I'm still here. I'm still willing to fight for this, for us, because I believe in you. And I believe that we can get through this if you're willing to try." Sophia stood up, walking toward the window. She didn't say anything for a while, just stood there, looking out at the city skyline. David watched her, waiting. He had no idea what was going through her mind, but he could feel the tension in the air, like they were both waiting for something to break. Finally, she turned around, her eyes meeting his. There was pain in them, but there was something else too, a flicker of something he hadn't seen in days, hope. "I'm not saying that everything is going to be okay overnight, David," she said quietly. "And I'm not saying I've forgiven you, but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see if we can rebuild, if you really are who you say you are now. But you have to know, this is going to take time, and you can't rush it." David's heart soared, but he kept his expression steady. "I don't expect you to rush. I just want to be here, for you, for us, and I'll be patient. I'll take whatever time you need." Sophia nodded slowly. "We'll see how it goes." David smiled, though it wasn't the triumphant grin he had once imagined. It was a smile full of hope, full of uncertainty, but also full of the smallest spark of belief. They weren't done yet. Maybe they never would be. But for the first time in a long while, David believed that this could be the beginning of something new. As Sophia walked toward the door, she paused. "One more thing, David." He looked up at her, his heart racing again. "Anything. You have to stop hiding behind your success. You have to stop using it as a shield to protect yourself. If we're going to rebuild, you need to be honest with yourself first. You need to know who you are, without all the wealth and the power." David nodded, his chest tightening once more. It was true. He had spent so many years thinking that success would protect him, that it would define him. But now he saw it for what it was, an armor that kept him from being vulnerable. "I will," he promised, his voice steady. "I'll figure it out. I'll find who I am without the money. And I'll do it for you. For us." Sophia gave him a small nod before turning toward the door. "We'll see, David. We'll see." And with that, she left. David sat there for a long time after, his mind swirling with everything that had been said. But as the silence settled over him, one thing became clear. This was a beginning, not an end. Whether or not they could make it, he would try. He had to. Because if he didn't, he knew he would lose everything that mattered. The next few weeks felt like a slow burn. David found himself walking on eggshells around Sophia, constantly questioning his every move. Every word, every action seemed to carry the weight of their past, and despite his promises to change, he could feel the lingering doubt in her eyes. The distance between them had shrunk, but only slightly. David had spent years building walls around himself, and even though he had begun tearing them down, he wasn't sure if Sophia could ever trust him fully again. She had said she was willing to try, but her actions were guarded, cautious, and David couldn't blame her. He had given her every reason to doubt him. One evening, as they sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, David could feel the tension in the air. They were talking more than they had in weeks, but the conversation always seemed to hover around the surface, never diving too deep. "How's work?" David asked, trying to keep things light. Sophia shrugged, her eyes flicking up to meet his. "It's fine, same as always." David nodded, searching for something to say that would break the invisible wall between them. But there was nothing. Every topic felt like an obstacle, a reminder of what had come before. "I've been thinking," Sophia began, her voice hesitant, "about what you said, about needing time, about proving things." David's heart skipped a beat. "Sophia, I meant it. I want to prove to you that I can change, that I can be the person you need me to be." She took a deep breath, her fingers tapping nervously on the table. "It's not just about you proving things to me anymore, David. It's about me trusting you again. You've already said all the right things. You've apologized, but I need to see it. I need to know that you can be the man you say you are." David swallowed, his throat dry. "I understand. I know it's not going to be easy. Trust isn't something I can expect from you overnight." Sophia looked down at her hands, her expression unreadable. "No, it's not. And I don't think I can just let things go back to the way they were, like nothing happened." David's chest tightened. "I don't want things to go back to the way they were. I want something better, something real, something built on honesty, on trust. But I can't do that alone. I need you to trust me again. I know it's hard, but I'll do whatever it takes." There was a long pause before Sophia spoke again. "The thing is, David, I don't even know who you are anymore. I don't know if I can trust the person sitting in front of me." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He knew what she meant. She wasn't just questioning his actions. She was questioning who he had become. "I've been so caught up in everything, in control, in money," David said, his voice quiet, "that I forgot what really mattered. I forgot what it meant to truly love, to trust, to be vulnerable. I've made so many mistakes." Sophia's eyes softened, but her voice was still uncertain. "And I don't know if I can just move past that. I need to know that the man I'm with now is the man I can trust. And right now, I don't feel like I know you. I feel like I'm living with a stranger." David's heart broke at her words. "I don't want to be a stranger to you, Sophia. I want to be the person you can trust, the person who deserves your love. But I know that's something I've lost. I've lost your trust, and I know that it's not something that can be rebuilt overnight." Sophia looked at him, her expression torn. "I want to believe that, I do, but you've made it so hard." David stood up, walking over to where she sat. "I know. I've made it so hard, and I hate myself for it. But I'm asking you, Sophia, to give me the chance to prove that I can be the man you deserve." She looked at him, searching his eyes as if trying to read his soul. "I'm not sure how long it will take," she said softly, "or if it's even possible. But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to take that risk, but only if you show me that you can trust me too. Because right now, I'm not sure I can trust you either." David nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. "I understand. I don't expect you to trust me right away, but I'll earn that trust. I'll prove to you that I can be the man you believe I can be." Sophia stood up and walked to the window, her back turned to him. "This isn't going to be easy, but I don't want to give up on us." David moved closer to her, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. "Neither do I. I won't give up on you. I won't give up on us." For a long time they stood there in silence, the only sound the quiet hum of the city outside. It was as if the world had stopped moving, and all that mattered was this fragile moment of understanding between them. David knew that this wasn't the end. It wasn't a happy resolution, but it was a beginning of something new, something that would take time, patience, and effort. He knew that trust once broken would take time to heal, but for the first time in a long time he truly believed that they could rebuild if they were both willing to try. "I'm ready," David whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Are you?" Sophia turned to face him, her eyes filled with uncertainty but also with a glimmer of hope. "I don't know," she said softly, "but I'm willing to find out." David reached for her hand, feeling the warmth of her touch. It was a small step, but it was a step forward. And that was all he needed, just the smallest flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild what they had broken. David stood in front of the cafe, his hands stuffed in his jacket pockets. The cool evening air nipped at his skin, but it wasn't the chill of the night that made him shiver. It was the uncertainty of the moment, the uncertainty of what was to come next. Sophia had agreed to give him a chance, but every day, every word, every gesture seemed like it was teetering on the edge. They hadn't yet crossed the line from doubt to trust, but they were walking toward it, slowly, carefully. David knew it was going to take more than patience to rebuild what he had broken. It would take vulnerability, something he hadn't been able to offer before. But as he stood outside waiting for the evening to unfold, he realized he couldn't do it alone. He had to face his fears. He had to confront the things that had kept him from being honest, not just with Sophia, but with himself. The door to the cafe opened, and out stepped Ben. David hadn't seen him in a while, not since their last conversation. Ben had always been the voice of reason in David's life, but lately he hadn't known how to reach him. Still, seeing Ben standing there in front of him, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of his lips, David felt a sense of relief wash over him. "Hey, man," Ben greeted, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of concern. "You all right?" David nodded, though the truth was, he wasn't. He wasn't sure he'd ever be all right until everything was back in place, until he'd done what he needed to do to fix the mess he'd made. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe he wasn't so alone. "Yeah," David replied, his voice rough. "Just trying to figure it all out." Ben gave him a long look, as if weighing whether or not he should ask more. But instead, he just slapped David lightly on the shoulder. "Come on, let's get a drink." They walked inside the cafe together, the warmth from the building immediately wrapping around David. The noise of the crowd seemed distant, muffled. It was as if, in that moment, he was focused only on the man beside him, the man who had been there for him when everything else had crumbled. David and Ben had shared countless hours together in the past, often talking about business, life, and everything in between. But today, there was a different kind of weight in the air, a weight that neither of them could ignore. They ordered their drinks in silence and sat down at a corner booth, the dim light of the cafe casting shadows on their faces. Ben waited a moment, taking a sip of his coffee before breaking the silence. "Look, David," Ben started, his tone soft but serious. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened with you and Sophia, and I know you've been carrying a lot of guilt. But you need to hear this. You can't fix everything by yourself." David looked up at Ben, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Ben continued, his eyes searching David's face, that sometimes we think we can solve everything with words or actions, but the truth is, sometimes we need help. We need to let other people in, let them help us carry the burden. David felt a lump form in his throat. I don't know how to let anyone in anymore. I've pushed everyone away, and now I'm not sure if there's anyone left who'll stick around. Ben leaned forward, his voice lowering. Sophia's still there, David. She's still willing to fight for this. But you need to show her that you're not the man who's been hiding behind control and fear. You need to show her that you can be the man she fell in love with. David sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know if I can. I don't know if she'll ever forgive me for what I've done. She's been through so much, and now I'm asking her to trust me again, to love me again. Ben shook his head, his expression unwavering. It's not about asking her, man. It's about showing her. You can't demand trust. It has to be earned. And if you're going to earn it, you need to be open, not just with her, but with yourself. This whole time you've been holding on to a version of yourself that doesn't even exist anymore. David sat back, taking in what Ben had said. It was true. He had been hiding behind the image of the man he thought he should be, the successful, confident businessman who controlled every aspect of his life. But that man was gone. And in his place was a man who was broken, who was struggling to make amends, but who didn't know how to start. I've been afraid, David confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. Afraid of being vulnerable, of letting anyone see how scared I am. I thought I could fix everything by being strong, by controlling everything, but I can't do this alone. Ben's expression softened. You don't have to, but you need to ask for help. You need to trust others to help you heal. You've been hiding from the truth about yourself for so long that it's time to stop running. Sophia can't fix you, but she's willing to be there while you fix yourself. David felt a tear prick at the corner of his eye, a weight lifting from his chest that he hadn't even realized was there. I don't know where to start. Start with being honest, Ben said gently. Start by admitting to her, to yourself, that you need help. And when you do that, you'll show her you're ready to be the person you both deserve. David sat in silence for a moment, the truth of Ben's words sinking in. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he wasn't just fighting for something to hold on to, but fighting for something real. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew that he had to face it head on. And maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to earn back the trust he had lost. David stood at the edge of the park, watching as the autumn leaves swirled in the wind. The crisp air stung his skin, but the real coldness was inside him, deep in his chest. The weight of what was to come pressed down on him like a lead blanket. He had known this moment would come, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure if he was ready. Ready for what? To prove himself? To win back the trust he had lost? Sophia had asked for time, but David knew the truth. Time was only the first part of the equation. The second part was proving that he had changed, that he was not the man who had tested her love, that he wasn't someone she couldn't rely on. But how? How could he prove that? What could he possibly say or do to make her see him as the man he desperately wanted to be? His phone buzzed in his pocket. He took it out, his pulse quickening when he saw her name. Sophia. He hadn't spoken to her in days, but she had finally agreed to meet him today. The text was simple. We need to talk. I'm ready to listen. David took a deep breath. This was it. This was his chance. He hit reply and typed a single word. Okay. And then he added, I'll be waiting. Sophia arrived at the park a few minutes later, her steps purposeful but slow. David stood, nervously adjusting his jacket as he watched her approach. When she reached him, their eyes locked, and for a brief moment, the world around them seemed to fade into the background. She didn't say anything at first. She didn't need to. The silence between them spoke volumes. David could see the fatigue in her eyes, the weight of the past few weeks pressing down on her. He knew what she was feeling because it was the same thing he felt every time he looked at her. Hi, David said softly, the word falling from his lips like an apology. It wasn't just a greeting. It was everything he had failed to express. The regret, the sorrow, the longing. Sophia gave a small nod but didn't smile. Her expression was guarded, as if she were waiting for something, anything, to make her feel like she wasn't walking into another trap. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "And I need to know something, David. Can I trust you again?" David's heart skipped a beat, and he felt as though the ground beneath him was shifting. The question was simple, but the weight of it, of the finality behind it, was suffocating. Could he truly earn her trust back? "I've been asking myself the same thing," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can ever fully make up for what I've done, but I'm here, and I'm willing to prove that I've changed. I want to be the man you believed I could be. Not the man I was before, but someone who can be honest, who can trust you, who can be vulnerable." Sophia's eyes flickered for a moment, as though she were searching for something in his words. The hesitation in her gaze made David's stomach twist. He had done so much damage, and he wasn't sure if she could ever see him the same way again. "Words don't mean much to me right now, David," she said, her voice a little harder now. "I need more than that. I need to see you prove it. I need you to show me that you're the person you say you are, that you can be someone I can rely on, not just someone who says the right things." David nodded, the gravity of her words settling deep inside him. He wasn't asking for immediate forgiveness. He wasn't even asking for everything to go back to normal. He just wanted a chance, just one chance to show her that he could be better, that they could be better. "I understand," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "And I know that I can't ask for your trust. I have to earn it. I'm not asking for you to believe in me overnight, but I will show you that I'm not the man I was. I've learned that love isn't a game. It's not something you can test or control. It's something you give. It's something you believe in." Sophia's eyes softened slightly, but she didn't look away. "I don't know if I can just forget what you did, but I'm willing to see if you can prove that you've changed. If you can show me that the man in front of me now is someone who will fight for me, fight for us." David's breath caught in his throat. I will fight for you, for us. I'm not going to make any more excuses. I'm going to show you that I can be the person you can trust again." Sophia studied him for a long moment, the silence between them heavy with meaning. The wind rustled the leaves around them, but neither of them moved. Finally, she took a deep breath. "I don't know what's going to happen, David," she said quietly, "but I'm willing to try. And if you're ready to fight, then maybe we can start over. Maybe we can rebuild." David's heart soared, but he kept his expression calm, knowing that this was only the beginning. Rebuilding wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be fast, but it was possible. And for the first time in weeks, he felt like he had a chance. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said firmly, his voice full of determination. "I'll be the man you deserve." Sophia nodded slowly, a flicker of something like hope in her eyes. "We'll see, David. We'll see." As she turned to walk away, David felt a new sense of purpose rise inside him. This wasn't the end. It was a new beginning, a test of everything he had learned, a test of trust, and this time, he would pass. David sat on the edge of the couch, staring out the window. The city was bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, but he couldn't shake the heaviness in his chest. It had been weeks since the day he'd stood in front of Sophia, promising to prove he could be the man she deserved, and now the waiting had become unbearable. It wasn't just about the words anymore. He had said all the right things, done all the right actions. He had been patient, giving her space, letting her heal. But every day, the silence between them seemed to stretch further. There were no more fights, no more harsh words. But there was no warmth either. No easy smiles, no spontaneous laughter. It was like they were both living in a limbo, unsure of where they stood. He had tried so hard to be the person she could trust, but it felt like he was fighting a battle against time and his own insecurities. It was one thing to say he had changed. It was another to prove it. Just as he was about to stand up and go for a walk to clear his head, his phone buzzed on the coffee table. His heart skipped a beat when he saw the name, Sophia. "Can we meet tomorrow? I want to talk." David felt a rush of hope flood through him, and with it, a wave of anxiety. This could be it. This could be the conversation that decided everything. He had been waiting for this moment, waiting for her to finally say that she believed in him again. He quickly typed back, his fingers trembling slightly. "I'll be there, wherever you want." The next day, David arrived at the park early, pacing anxiously near the spot where they had met weeks ago. He had been doing everything he could to keep his focus on the present, to keep his mind from spiraling back into the past. But it wasn't easy. Every part of him wanted to rush through this moment, to have everything decided, to know where they stood. He didn't want to wait anymore. He wanted her back. Sophia arrived right on time, her steps slow, deliberate, as though she too was bracing for what was to come. David's heart raced when he saw her, but he stayed still, waiting for her to speak. She stopped in front of him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to read him. After a long moment, she finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear. "I've been thinking a lot about us, David. About everything." David's stomach tightened, but he nodded, willing himself to remain calm. "I've been thinking about it too. I know it hasn't been easy. I know that I've hurt you, but I also know that I can be better. I've been trying. I don't want to lose you." Sophia exhaled slowly, glancing down for a moment before meeting his eyes again. "I've been thinking about that too, about whether I can forgive you, whether I can trust you again." David felt his heart constrict. He had been expecting this, but hearing it still felt like a punch to the gut. The last few weeks had been a test, not just of his patience, but of Sophia's ability to forgive, to open herself up to him again. "I know you're scared," David said, his voice barely a whisper. "I know that what I've done has hurt you and I can't undo it. But I want you to know that I'm not the man who hurt you anymore. I'm not that man. I don't want to be." Sophia looked at him for a long moment before speaking again, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "I'm scared too, David. I'm scared that I'm just fooling myself, that I'll let you in again, only for you to disappoint me. I'm scared that I won't be able to trust you like I once did, but..." David held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. "But I think I'm ready to try," she continued softly. "I think I'm ready to start over. But it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to happen overnight. You have to know that." David felt a weight lift from his chest, but it wasn't relief. It was a bittersweet understanding of how much work lay ahead. He wasn't going to get everything he wanted right away, but he had something he hadn't had in a long time: hope. "I'm ready for it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll take it one step at a time. No more rushing, no more pretending. Just us trying again." Sophia's gaze softened, but her eyes were still cautious. "I don't know what it's going to look like, David. I don't know if we'll be able to rebuild everything, but I do know that I want to try. I want to see if we can be something better than what we were." David nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "That's all I want too, something better, and I'll do whatever it takes to prove that I'm worth that trust." They stood there for a moment in the quiet of the park, the weight of their words hanging in the air. For the first time in a long while, David felt like they were on the same page, like they were both willing to take the leap together. "I'm sorry for everything I've put you through," David said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I never wanted to hurt you. I'll spend the rest of my life proving that." Sophia gave a small, fragile smile, the first one David had seen in days. "You don't have to prove anything today, David. Just be here. Be real. That's all I need." David nodded, his heart swelling in his chest. For the first time, he didn't feel like he was fighting a battle alone. This was a new chapter. It was the beginning of something fragile, something uncertain, but something worth fighting for. They turned to walk together, side by side, their steps slow but steady. There were no promises of perfection, no guarantees, but there was hope, and that, for the first time in a long time, felt like enough.